Mrs. Lancaster is dead. I'm afraid she's been murdered, Miss Lydia. She swayed so that I caught her by the arm, and some of her bundles dropped. She made no attempt to pick them up. But I was there, she said faintly. I was there this afternoon. I took her some jellied chicken, just after lunch. She was all right then. In the end I took her home, cutting across the common to save time, and was glad to find that she had rallied somewhat. How was it done? She asked. I'm not sure. I believe with an axe. Don't think about it, I added, as I felt her trembling again. We can't help it now. And then she said a strange thing. Well, she was my own sister-in-law, but I never liked her. And I suppose they stood it as long as they could. She tried to cover that up the next moment, saying she was upset and not responsible, and that the girls had been devoted daughters. But I remembered the strange look Mr. Lancaster had given them one after the other, only a short time before, and I wondered if he had not had the same thought as Lydia. That is all I really saw or heard that afternoon. Now I know something of what went on in that shambles of a room upstairs in the Lancaster house, of the discovery of the axe, thrown on top of the big tester bed and discovered by the stain which had seeped through the heavy sateen, and the further discovery that it was the axe from the Lancaster woodshed, and that the only prints on it were old ones, later found to be ebons, and badly smudged. I know that they took measurements of this and that, and opened the windows and looked out, and that the medical examiner arrived with a black bag some time later, and went upstairs as briskly as though we had a daily axe murder in the Crescent. When I say that I know all this, I mean that all the Crescent knows. It knows the exact moment when Mrs. Lancaster's body was taken away, the exact moment when the police decided to hold Eben for further interrogation, and the exact moment when Miss Emily toiled feebly up the stairs and asked if there had been a key on a fine chain around her mother's neck. A key? One of the detectives is said to have asked. Anybody find a key on a chain? Nobody had, and our information was that Miss Emily immediately began to tear apart that dreadful bed, crying and moaning as she did so. But that no key or chain had been found, either there or elsewhere in this case being the morgue, a word which we avoided on general principles. But the Crescent still knew practically nothing at all of what had happened when I went home that late summer afternoon to break the news to Mother. Save for Mrs. Talbot, who heard the news from Lydia and rushed over at once, only to be summarily if politely ejected by the police, the rest remained in ignorance for a good 2 hours, and the Daltons even longer. The usual crowd which follows police cars had either been daunted by our gates or was being held outside them by a guard. Helen Wellington was away, having made one of her periodical breaks. The Lancaster servants were being held incommunicado, and even the reporters who had converged on the spot had, due to our planting and our semi-isolation, failed to rouse any suspicion. This is shown by the fact that I found Mother sitting on the porch when I returned. She was fanning herself, and complaining of the heat. "I wondered where you were," she said rather fretfully. "Is Mr. Lancaster worse? I see a car there." This was not surprising, since by that time there were at least 6 cars in a row before the Lancaster walk which led to the house. But I had to break the news to her, and I did it as tactfully as I could. That she was shocked and horrified I could see, but the Crescent carries its emotions, when it has any, to its bedroom and there locks the door. Never by any chance does it show them to the servants or to the casual passerby. She got up suddenly. "I must go over at once," she said. "They will need help. I'm afraid the police won't let you in, Mother." "Don't be absurd. They let you in. They wanted to ask me some questions." "Precisely," she said dryly. "My only daughter is interrogated by the police, and I am not even consulted. Besides, the Lancasters are my best and oldest friends, and when I think of that lonely old man and those 2 devoted daughters." "Well, that is as may be." Mother had hardly spoken to Mr. Lancaster for years, due to a disputed boundary line, and I had frequently heard her refer to the daughters as 2 spineless women who allowed themselves to be dominated by an unscrupulous and hard old woman. But the tradition of the Crescent is more or less to canonize its dead, which is not so bad after all. I got her into the house finally, and there she asked for such details as I knew of the crime. It seemed to me that she listened with singular intentness, and that toward the end she relaxed somewhat. "You say that all the doors were fastened?" "The maids say so. You know how particular they are." "And Emily, when she ran out? She was fully dressed?" In pure white, mother, I said, and smiled a little,